Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this.
Hey everyone, Wealthy here. This is the Finnish J35XS, and it's the aircraft that Sweden received as its respective Tier 7 premium. And that of course means that buying this aircraft would set you back $70 US. Is it worth it? Well, yeah, it's a pretty decent aircraft. It's got countermeasures, it's got 6 IR missiles, and also has pretty decent flight performance. So I totally think that
No, you shouldn't buy it.
I'm sorry, who are you? What? Well, I mean, well, I'm you. That makes no... Never mind. Why are you saying you shouldn't buy the J35XS? Well, that's a good question. In order to answer that question, let's first take a look at the... As I already mentioned, this is the J35XS, and it sits at a battle rating of 10.7. And on paper, this is a very, very good jet for its battle rating. And I say that because the J35XS has essentially got all the ingredients that you need in order to make a fantastic fighter. It's got countermeasures, it's got decent flight performance, it's got 6 IR missiles, and of course it has a gun for close range dogfighting. So this plane has everything that you need in order for a jet to be good at 10.7. That must mean that this jet is a great plane, right? Well, yeah, this is a good aircraft. But it's not just good, it's good with an asterisk. It's fine, but there's a catch. As I mentioned, this jet has countermeasures, and that's a great thing, because without flares, there is no way that you can use any jet to its fullest potential at 10.7 in the current matchmaker. However, the J35XS only gets 12 countermeasure slots in total, and what's worse is that you're always going to be firing 2 flares at once. Now sure, that doesn't sound bad, I mean, just manage your flares properly, but it does mean that occasionally you're going to find yourself in situations where, oh, that's named I know, I'm out of flares, Also, it's important to mention that you only get 6 pops of flares if you are carrying just the flares. If you decide to also carry chaff, that number is brought down to 3. Honestly, don't bother carrying chaff in this plane because you just don't have enough countermeasure slots to bring it along. Although, to be fair, the J35XS doesn't really need chaff anyway because this plane has a very clever way of dealing with radar missiles. Essentially, it doesn't have an RWR, and as we all know, if I can't see it, it can't hurt me, right?
Are you sure about that?
Long story short, sure, the J35XS gets countermeasures, but it's countermeasures with a little asterisk because in reality, what you really get is 6 pops of flares. No RWR, no chaff, and if you run out of flares, then, well, good luck. This countermeasure predicament is not the only thing that looks better on paper than it is in reality about the J35XS. In fact, the J35XS can be equipped with 6 RB24Js, and in case you don't know, the RB24J is just a renamed AIM-9P. And sure, the AIM-9P is not the best missile available at 10.7. However, that doesn't mean that these missiles are useless either. Being a 20G rear aspect IR missile, the AIM-9P is more than good enough to get the job done. In fact, I personally quite like this missile. It's a bit goofy in the sense that you can pull it well outside of its gimbal limit, and sometimes it will also just blatantly ignore flares. So, in essence, I think the AIM-9J / the RB24J is a perfectly good missile for this aircraft, and the fact that you get 6 of them is honestly really nice. But on the other hand, well, it's also kind of essential because you really are going to be relying on these missiles a lot to get most of your air kills. Why? Well, there's 2 reasons for this. First of all, you have 2 air-to-air weapons when you're playing this jet. You get your missiles, and then you get your gun. Gun singular.
Bruh.
To be fair, having only a single gun doesn't necessarily have to be bad, as long as that one gun is a good gun with a high fire rate and it's placed along the center line of the aircraft. This is none of those things. Not only is it really far away from the plane's center line,
That's quite big.
But perhaps more importantly, it also doesn't get any tracer shells, which means that aiming this gun can be really infuriating. Sure, it's better than having no gun at all, but that's not necessarily a compliment, now is it? That said, the lackluster gun is not the main reason you'll mainly be relying on your missiles to get air kills whilst you're flying the J35XS. In fact, that has to do with something else entirely. If you already watched some reviews about the J35XS, then you might have seen that this plane is very unstable. For example, if you watched Devin's review about this plane, you'll have seen that this aircraft has a tendency to superstall. Or at least, it had a tendency to superstall, because the thing is, after Devin made his review, as well as a bunch of other creators, the J35XS's flight model was fundamentally changed. So instead of being a very unstable aircraft, nowadays this plane feels like it is absolutely on rails, which on the plus side means that the J35XS is now extremely hard to flat spin, and it also does have a lot better energy retention than it used to, but on the downside, well, this plane now feels extremely boring to fly. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that boring is bad. I mean, look at the MiG-19S, that plane is a very boring to fly plane in my opinion, but I cannot deny that it's one of the best dogfighters at 9.3. But here's the thing, the MiG-19 is boring but good. The J35XS is boring and okay, mediocre, fine, good enough. Honestly, I'm not really quite sure how I would describe the flight performance of the J35XS. Essentially, if you would say that something like the Kafir Canard and the F5E is A tier, then this is B tier. It's not bad, it's still good enough, but it's also not best in class. And to be fair, it doesn't really need to be either. Something like the Kafir Canard is definitely a better dogfighter than the XS, but the XS does carry 3 times the amount of missiles that the Canard does, and as a result, this plane doesn't have to rely on dogfighting as much in order to get a lot of air kills. I guess a good way to describe the playstyle of this jet is kind of like a weird mix of the F5E as well as the F104G, and I suggest this because just like the F104G, the XS can be used as a boom and zoom missile slinger, whilst at the same time, just like the F5E, it is also pretty competent at dogfighting. However, it's important to keep in mind that although the XS can participate in both of these playstyles, it doesn't excel at either of them. And with that said, I think it's time that I move on to the central question of this video. Like I said at the beginning, this is a $70 US premium. So naturally the question is, should you buy? Before I explain whether or not I think it's worth it to buy the J35XS, I think it's important that I first quickly recap my opinion about this aircraft. So, in short, the J35XS is a bit of a weird aircraft. On the surface, it seems like this would be a great plane. However, if you start to dig a little bit deeper, you'll quickly realize that this plane has quite a few shortcomings. For one, the gun is really hard to aim, but perhaps more importantly, it's got a very limited amount of flares, it doesn't have an RWR, and carrying chaff is really not very viable at all. And thus, playing this jet can be quite a handful. What do you get for managing to cope with all these shortcomings? Well, honestly, you don't really see much of a return. Although this is a pretty decent aircraft, it's got good enough flight performance for dogfighting and it also got 6 missiles, there's really nothing about this aircraft that makes it particularly good compared to anything else around this battle rating. It's fine, it's just not the best at anything. At the same time, this jet also just isn't very rewarding to use. And I say that because, well, due to the changes to the flight model, this aircraft now doesn't really have any character. It's not that fun to fly because it feels like it's on rails, but perhaps more importantly, there's really just nothing special about flying this jet that makes me want to come back to it. And with all of that in mind, let's circle back to that initial question of whether or not you should buy this jet. Honestly, that really depends on what you're looking for. First things first, I don't recommend this aircraft to beginners at all. Sure, one could argue that 6 missiles makes it easy for a newbie to get a couple of air kills, but on the other hand, all the shortcomings that I mentioned in this video make it so that this plane is not exactly beginner friendly. At the same time, I don't really recommend this aircraft to more experienced players either. Not because this plane is super hard to play, but rather just because there's more fun options out there. If you are a veteran player and you're looking for a new fun tier 7 premium, I personally would recommend the Kfir Canard instead. Does this mean I don't recommend the J35XS to anybody? Well, that's not exactly the case either. If you are dead set on grinding through the Swedish tech tree, but you don't really want to play any of the Swedish aircraft, then I guess the J35XS is a pretty decent choice. Not only is it literally your only high tier option, but I do think that this is still one of the better tier 7 premiums that you can buy. It's not A tier like the Kfir Canard or the F4S, but it's still somewhere in the top 4 of my personal favorite tier 7 premiums. With that said, thank you very much for watching. Remember to comment down below what you personally think of the J35XS, and well, goodbye.